Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Revival of America podcast again. This is Jenny. I'm the owner and the host of the Revival of America. Today we have SG Anon in the house, everybody. He is here with us once a month, as many of you do know, so he's going to be gracing us here shortly with his presence. He has 55 minutes to 60 minutes of his time, so let's be mindful of that, everybody, when we request a mic, because I get it. I know some people can't get to their mics in time, but because we are kind of on some time constraints. He does have another call to get on to. So when you do request a mic, please ask your question to him. Also, to everybody, be careful who you listen to, who you follow, what you're putting into your mind. You hear myself, my guests talk about it all the time. I talk about it, they reiterate it. We have conversations about it. So it's very important that you protect your mind, everybody. Protect what you're listening to. I've been saying 3 to 5 people. If that's who you've been following through the course of your journey, now I'm going to say 1 to 3 people, because that's how we need to actually kind of revet the people that we're paying attention to, right? Because we're starting to see some of these people come to fruition that we thought maybe were good, that may not be so good, or vice versa. So again, everybody, if you are confused and you just don't know who to trust at all, please follow, of course, God above, and then Donald Trump. Because again, like we said in the last 2 podcasts, uh, Trump is telling us, everybody, he's not directly telling us, but he's telling us without telling us. And I say this all the time: we are in war. You can't give your enemy your next move. And like Captain Kyle said last show, is that he's going to jeopardize himself if he comes out and directly says some things. So please, everybody, be careful who you listen to and who you follow and what you're putting into your mind. Also, too, everybody, I'm going to keep my PSS short because SG is on a time constraint, but I do want to let you guys know, if you don't know already, we are being listened to in over 100 countries. So we are making some great positive noise. So please go follow us on the podcast host. If you need another location to listen to it at because Rumble's not performing properly for you, go to iHeartRadio, Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Google, Breaker, Pocket Cast, Podbean, Riverside, Amazon Music. And then the social medias are Jenny Jeread Facebook, at Jenny_Jeread X, at J Jeread Rumble, at J Jeread Instagram, at J Jeread True Social, the Revival of America right here on Telegram, the Revival of America over on YouTube. And then also to go to the website, everybody, therevivalofamerica.com, fill out the newsletter. It is free. You get the weekly updates on the show lineups as well as the updated podcast. So without further ado, as SG Anon always says, hello, my friend. He is here.
For once, I'm a little bit early. I think the seas might begin to roar.
I think I have passed out and had to like revive myself. He's here. He's on time. He's not late. How
Wonderful
are
to be
you?
back, Jenny. Thank you for having me. I'm doing well, moving right along through the Great Awakening, as each and every one of you out there are doing, and evaluating events in real time to the best of my ability.
Well, SG, you're doing a great job. I follow you obviously on many of your locations that you're at, and you're posting a lot of great stuff as you always do, and then of course you speak to it as well. So I just had a podcast with Alpha Warrior, and then one after that with Captain Kyle. And we see so many things that are happening. And I always tell my audience, hang on to the positive, because there's more positive than there is negative. But I kind of want to turn the tables a little bit, because we've been talking a little bit about obviously, you could talk about whatever you want, SG. So, I mean, the floor is going to be yours. But I did notice a couple of posts that you did have on your Telegram and your X. And obviously, it's coming to fruition. I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit than I was in the other 2 podcasts, but let's talk a little bit about, at least right here in the beginning, and then you go into whatever you want. These are my questions for you regarding the Charlie Kirk situation. We know that was a very unfortunate situation, and I tell my audience, from what we learned with that, whatever it is, if it's real or fake, the message that Charlie sent. So we need to hang on to that of God, faith, family, country, right? And then the revival it created through the entire world, not just here in America. But now we're seeing, because this thing just smells to high end BS, right? And I get more confused the more the days go on, the more the stuff comes out. But we're really seeing Candace Owens right now come out and speak really a lot on it. Kind of a lot of the same questions. She's asking all the questions that maybe many of us want to ask. Can you maybe give us your 2 cents on your take on all of this? I kind of have an idea, but I would love for the audience to hear.
Jenny, it's interesting that you should ask that, because your audience will be the first audience to get a little bit of an insight into what is going to come onto audio file 100, which I'm endeavoring to try to get published as soon as I can. And it's
Woohoo!
with respect to the assassination itself and the events that we've seen in the sequence of events and the obvious nonsense that has come from various pulpits and institutions and from some individuals who I think a lot of the patriots along in this journey have come to know and trust and understand. And so they're going to be examining these individuals much more deeply. And I think that is the essence and the core insight of what we need to appreciate from a very large, very expanded, we'll call it 100,000 foot view of this entire situation. And one of the things I want to highlight for your audience out there is that while the time frame leading up to this event, and while those negotiations that Ms. Owens has been talking about a number of times on her platform now were happening at high levels of TPUSA, and these were negotiations for contracts and businesses and donations and strategic partnerships and initiatives and potential projects and all of the things that a very large, very well-placed nonprofit entity with a large footprint would be having discussions about on a day-to-day basis. While these were occurring, the U.S. Navy's Sixth Fleet was participating in a so-called training exercise. And guess where the training exercise was happening? It was happening in Constanta, Romania. And so this happens to be the same town that Miss Erica Fransva had established a children's nonprofit in, operating under the protection and escort of the United States Marine Corps during the height of the Barack Obama administration, really going into Barack Obama #2, 2012-13, on the way up through 2016. There are numerous complaints lodged with the Romanian authorities that have been reported and documented by Romanian media pretty heavily, actually, in the area, tying back to evangelical ministries and orphanages where children are just going missing. And these complaints coincide with the time period of not only Ms. Fransva's operation of the charity operating there in Constanta. I believe hers is Romanian Angels, but also a number of other programs that were in the area, tying back to evangelical church organizations and associations in the West. And so what I find extremely interesting is that this situation with Candace Owens being the one to lead this investigation into what's going on with Charlie Kirk, it's not as cut and dry, in my opinion, Jenny, as a lot of people out there think it is with respect to the situation of the Israeli state and Tel Aviv.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And did you cut out, SG? I'm sorry.
I did. I apologize. There was a lag right there for a second, but I want to draw another connection here and another inclusion here. There are obvious connections between Tel Aviv and assassination activities and destabilization activities going, all around the world, and certainly in the last 20 to 25 years, we've been able to unearth a great deal of that as good digital soldiers out there online, trying to do our best with research and sharing it to the best of our ability. But with the situation happening right now and unfolding in the aftermath of Mr. Kirk's tragic death, and I'm not going to I'm not going to undignify the man's name and legacy by attempting to insinuate that he's somehow still alive or not. Truthfully, Jenny, I just don't know. The entire thing seems suspect, but I think we should make the allocation that he's a casualty of war in a much broader conflict. And with Miss Owens being the one to push this particular situation forth, and with her tie-overs, with her own ties to certain secret brotherhoods through her husband, who is an interesting individual that a lot of people out there should perhaps investigate a little further. It's almost like you have a secret society versus secret society war, essentially overflowing or flooding out into the publicly visible space. And so what do I mean by this? Well, I can't say for certain what Miss Erica Fransva's true history and true activities over the last 15 to 20 years have been. I can say that she opened a global nonprofit with a worldwide international footprint, well-funded, and had a partnership with the U.S. military, and that nonprofit was opened when she was still a minor at 17 years old. I also know that that nonprofit does not have any Form 990 available filings, which seem incredibly unusual. And even if you use the Wayback Machine, there are none available, going all of the way back to the earliest availabilities of that particular generator, that search engine on the IRS websites. She was schooled at Regis University, then Liberty University, and then another college that I can't remember right off the top of my head right now. But I'm zeroed in on Regis University because the largest female sorority at Regis University is Alpha Sigma Nu, which is a Jesuit society. And so as I look at this landscape playing out, it very much appears that we have a good actor, bad actor, light versus dark brotherhood situation sort of unfolding now into the public space. I think this is exactly why you saw Kash Patel honor Charlie Kirk in his first initial statements responding to the death by saying, "We'll see you in Valhalla." That is clearly an ode to a Norse order, and there's a significant presence of Norse orders tying back to the Swedish family, no less, the Swedish royal family and royal bloodlines present in Chicago. And Erika Fransva's grandfather was a knight of the Swedish crown. So looking at what we have right now, and I didn't even get into her tie-overs to the Corcoran Group, which is where she supposedly works as a real estate agent, and the Corcoran Group has brokered a number of different ultra-high net worth celebrity property sales up to and including one Jeffrey Epstein. So this entire landscape, in my opinion, Jenny, is about much more than just nation states destabilizing one another or committing assassinations on each other's soil. That's the surface narrative that a lot of us, I think, are focused on, because everyone obviously understands that there's something wrong with how much control and influence geopolitically the Israeli government has in Washington, D.C. But I think the actual sequence of events here is much, much deeper and much, much darker. And I think we got a glimpse of that in the aftermath of these events, because so many cameras and so many eyes of the world were on it in such a way that they simply could not hide it.
Oh, SG, I just love it when you come on and how you just you break it all down. I agree with you 1,000%. Just things just don't make sense, and I have been researching a lot of the same things that you're researching, and he was here in Phoenix, so yeah, his location of TPUSD or USA was right down the street. Yeah, it just is all. It's a little surreal because it kind of hit close home because he was here in my local area and did a lot of stuff around here. But then you kind of do all follow the money, right? You do all the research, and he just recently a year ago sold his $6.5 dollar mansion, and like it's coming out that they rented the stadium back in May. Like it's all crazy to me. So I literally had to step away from it, but I was looking so forward to hearing your kind of your thoughts about it, because I agree with you 100%. Like, I don't want to be insensitive to it, because if he is no longer with us, we know he's up with Jesus, with God, right? But then again, I want to be sensitive to the family too. So because it's a horrific thing, and unfortunately we got to see it. But again, I think that will all come out in the end. But before we go to questions, everybody, so if you have a question for SG, please feel free to start raising your hands, because again, he only has about 55 minutes, and we're 7 minutes into that. So go ahead and start raising your hands. But SG, what I did notice, Candace Owens, those two were pretty good friends there for quite some time. I kind of had noticed a little bit of a pullback between the two of them here. I don't know, maybe not so recent, but maybe in the last months or couple 3-6 months. But also too, she wasn't at the funeral, so I thought that was a little bit interesting. Do you know anything about that in your research? Have you noticed any of that?
Well, I found her absence to be quite stunning, actually, because when we see the actual messages, unless she's using photogenic engines photogenerative engines and really doing a super, super job at fabrication, these text messages appear to be raw, authentic, text messages between, I believe it's two Apple devices. And so you've got this indication through the communication of a very appreciative professional friendship, like a mutual acquaintanceship. I don't think it's out of the realm of reason to say that, Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens are sort of in the same peer age range. They would have been around 9, 10, 11, 12 years old when, 9/11 was a thing. And so old enough to understand more about the world, young enough still to have that innocence taken away. And so I think in a lot of ways you could make that case that there was a dynamic there. It certainly appears that there was. The video content that I've seen online seems extremely authentic between the two of them, and just very candid and sort of jovial in many regards. And so with her not being in attendance at the funeral, the memorial service, I found that very odd. But I also found a lot of things about that memorial service extremely odd. Some of the things that stood out to me were that we made this about ideologies rather than Charlie's memory. Typically at a funeral or a memorial, you have the people that get up there and they talk almost exclusively about their experiences personally with this person, who this person was. They don't attempt to assign where this person's beliefs were. They don't attempt usually to usurp the somberness and the reverence of the occasion with their own political gain or their own politics or thoughts or whatever. Because I think a lot of us intuitively understand that that's just sort of not the right place and time. There's an old movie quote out there, and I forget where it comes from, but the quote goes something along the lines of, "This is neither the time nor the place." And so to see a lot of what we saw up there with respect to content and rhetoric, and I don't want to say that all of the rhetoric was disingenuous, but it did seem like the energy was split. It seemed very off to me. The acoustics of the entire event, Jenny, seemed off to me. The way people expressed their sadness, in many cases, it seemed forced, even up to a couple of times where I wondered about Miss Kirk herself. And, you know, you see the body. And one of the things that I noticed with that, Jenny, I just want to give a tangent on this really quick. The reason that I talk about that specifically is because when she said that she forgave the young man who assassinated her husband, there was absolutely no bodily movement at all. And someone overcome with grief at a moment of catharsis understands, and if anyone out there in the audience has felt this, you will understand and recall moments in your life where you were not able to control those big gaping breaths, those sobbing breaths in your chest. And so just naturally, by a function of you breathing deeply and with a sort of a hyperventilative, you know, and what's the word, a higher blood pressure sort of pace, you know, an adrenaline rush that's being released into the system, the fact that her shoulders moved essentially not at all belies insincerity to me. It suggests that something was not authentic in that moment. Perhaps it's her dislike of Mr. Robinson. I'm not suggesting that she's not in actual grief, but what I am saying is that particular moment seemed unusual, both visibly with body language and behavior, and also acoustically with the statement that she made into the microphone and how it came out. You can hear when someone is talking through their crying, and you can hear when someone is just simply attempting to choke themselves up so that they sound like they're crying. For the managers out there, if you've had someone call in sick from work, you know when they're really sick and when they're not sick. And so the same is true, I think, in many other ways. And we have to apply these principles even to this situation, as emotionally charged as it is, because only critical analysis is going to do Mr. Kirk's legacy honor and dignity, in my own opinion.
I agree with you. I felt the same way. I had felt a lot of her body language was very odd when she did the first um, statement in the studio of Charlie Kirk's, and then yeah, I feel you, SG. I'm right there with you. So, but I absolutely appreciate your take on it because there's a lot of stuff circling it, and I know we gotta, brush off our shoes and keep pushing forward. But yeah, that thing just stinks of all high heaven. So thank you for that, SG. All right, everybody, I'm gonna start taking questions for SG. So please, if you have a question for SG, feel free to raise your hand. I will unmute your mic. So I have unmuted Gwen. Go ahead, and Kathy Jackson, you can go after Gwen. Go ahead, Gwen. Go ahead, Gwen. Your mic is unmuted. Okay. All right. Kathy Jackson, do you have a question for SG? Oh my goodness, everybody. If you guys request a mic, please be mindful of his time. He's only got 55 minutes and we're about 13 minutes into that. So, all right, SG, I'm going to go into a couple questions here on the board. What is your take on the 800 generals coming together? Well, the Quantico, Virginia situation with the generals.
Well, I think my take is probably going to be along the same lines as many of you out there. Your audience, Jenny, has a lot of really good digital warriors and Anons out there who are good researchers, and you connect the dots really well. Some of the questions I get in this forum are some of the more complex questions that I get on any guest platform. And so when I looked at that meeting, when I saw what was occurring here, and when you look at President Trump's rhetoric, how many times did he use the phrase, the enemy within? How many times did he say the number 17? Multiple times. How many times did he talk about the oath? How many times did he remind the generals and the admirals that there are domestic enemies and that the oath applies to them also? You know, how many times did we see President Trump, his body language and his mannerisms go from laid back and what I would call very conversational and very, relaxed in a professional manner to stoic and resolute. There were numerous times, 4 or 5 or 6 right off the top of my head that I can think of. One of the times was when he said, "We know everything about everybody." And that was a shot across the bow of the commanders there to let them know anyone who's going to go ahead and consider being an obstacle or a problem or an obstructionist as we go forward here, or a saboteur within the ranks, you're going to be met with the same type of swift fury that our enemies will be met with. And we already know who you are. So if that's your method if that's your intention of moving forward, we would walk that back. That's essentially what I take from that particular statement. And so looking over the entirety of President Trump's remarks, which were, over an hour in length, the stoicness of them, the reminder of, the great presidents and generals of American history, military heroes in American history, the amount of times he said the American people in that particular speech, the amount of times that he talked about the republic, at least twice that I can think of. And he said, "A republic we all love," I think, or something along those lines. This is clearly a marching orders event. I don't want to insinuate greater severity and intensity to it than what may be applicable. I think in a lot of ways, the country is extremely united. Under the baseline concepts, we're far more united. I can say this with absolute certainty. We're far more united than even the most, even the best digital airwaves can show to us. Even X does, it has a good job, but it also has its failings and shortfalls with that. But the vast majority of people out there, I would venture a guess, probably 85 to 90% at this point, are united on the basic principles. And some of those unifications happened in the aftermath of the event of Charlie Kirk's death in, the month of September, right before 9/11. And so I look at that, Jenny, and then we have this meeting that happens on the very end of September, the day before the U.S. civil government partially shuts down, which opens up certain expanded authoritative measures that the president can still take without being obstructed by bureaucratic nonsense and things of that nature. I look at this and we're clearly preparing for an escalative event. And I think what we're doing is not preparing for offense. I think we're preparing for defense. I think what we have right now in the United States of America, and the narrative has been well played and well established and well set up, even for some of your more gaslit normies who have just come around in recent months to things. They're beginning to understand the true nature of events and what really happened with things like the border and the destabilization of world politics and the weakness of the dollar and all of these sorts of things melding together, along with the craziness, of course, of the Democrat Party, continuously kowtowing and paying homage to this idea of illegal immigration, which just continually reinforces, when you're talking about consciousness warfare, that reinforces to the masses that someone else is more important than them, and that breeds rebellion against that particular authority. That is the function that breeds the teenage rebellion in all of those lovely teenagers out there, if you've ever raised children from pre-adolescence to post-adolescence. And so looking at what we've got right now, I think that we're preparing for an event to test that unification. And that event is going to tie back to a relatively insular and concentrated group of people. And I'll go so far, Jenny, as to say that I think the proximity to these events, I don't believe it's any coincidence that we now see James Comey indicted and brought in to this entire fray in a criminal manner, in a way that is not, or excuse me, in a civil manner, in a way that is not super significant in the long term, but allows for the collection of a great deal of human intelligence. And a lot of people out there have expressed discontent and upset with the severity of Comey's indictment and what he was charged with and all of the different things that he could have been charged with and this and that and the other. And I understand that. But when you're playing chess for all of the marbles worldwide, and this is a guy who has a lot of information that can be very useful and be brought out in the public record, so it can then be actionable in civil government and civil society, and potentially for even invocation of certain expanded jurisdictions where appropriate and needed. I would say that it's worth it to allow a little bit of leniency in exchange for that valuable information that's going to not only save lives and bring a lot of this to a stop and help us to interdict what is to come on the streets of America in certain places, especially the very inner city areas of blue cities across the nation, and not just in the big blue states. But it also allows us to permanently destroy the infrastructure, the underpinning, the foundations that it has been built upon within and outside of the United States of America. And if we can secure the international pathway and help everyone else secure their international pathways, then we all win. And that is why President Trump took that world tour in 2017 to begin with.
Amen. Thank you for that, SG. Great job. And then also too, for all of you that watched it, he confirmed that he was 45, 46, 47. He didn't want to take credit for the crap of 46. So again, everybody, he's telling you without directly telling you. Okay, everybody. So I'm going to go into some questions here. So I have unmuted Sue. Go ahead. Your mic is unmuted. All right, Sue, your mic is unmuted. People, if you're going to request a mic, please ask your question because, again, SG is on a time frame. Paul R., do you have a question for SG? Your mic is unmuted. Paul R., go ahead. Go ahead, Paul. Amy Wise, go ahead. Your mic is unmuted. Oh, my goodness. Amy, are you there? Paul,
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead.
I'm here. Okay. I didn't know if you could hear me. Okay. My question is about President Trump and what he's doing with the pharmaceutical companies. Seems like he's giving them money and teaming up with them. Any take on that?
I do have a couple of takes on that, Ms. Wise, and I appreciate you asking the question. One of my takes on that, I think, is that with respect to the events that are playing out in the world, not just in the United States, but the entirety of the world, you're seeing a lot of return. And that return is happening in the monetary space. It's happening in the repatriation space of individuals. It's happening in many cases with, entire companies, especially with the whole tariff thing right now with the United States of America. And if I can be so brash, I think with the pharmaceutical situation, we still have enough people in the United States that would fall off of the MAGA Maha wagon entirely if we saw the type of acts going to pharma for the crimes against humanity that we all know that they've committed. If you're on this type of call following this podcast, you know that they've committed crimes against humanity.
Yeah.
And so what's happening now, in my opinion, again, and I think it has to be a bit of a slow burn here because you've got this consciousness unification, and we've got evidence of that in the post-Kirk world, the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death, a lot of this sort of congealing for the first time. And so we've got this delicate situation, this reunification process that is happening, but it seems tenuous. And we've got these hot button issues that the mainstream press and their so-called intellectuals and experts are positively phenomenal at using to divide based on certain social lenses or perspectives that tie back to personal security, right? That's the basis of mind control programming, is personal security and survival. That's why all of it's based in trauma and fear, because you have to take the mind into those areas to program response mechanisms. And so with what's going on with President Trump, I think that you're seeing humiliation of Pfizer in some regards because they're very, very globalist at their core. Most of their research is done in the Ukraine, actually. They have a number of different satellite offices across the Western Hemisphere and Middle East and Africa, but most of their stuff is done in the Ukraine. And you're seeing them forced to give this money to the United States of America. And of course, it's going to be presented as investments in biotech and all this other stuff to pander to the mainstream media for a while. So the mind control cannot be weaponized against this new consciousness unification front that we see burgeoning up. And we've been waiting for this for a long time. I remember coming on this show, I think it's been about 2 years ago, Jenny, right around 2 years ago. And one of the questions that was asked was, how much longer are we going to have to wait for these people to really come around? And I don't remember my exact response, but I remember saying to this person, it takes a long time to unwind decades of mind control programming. And if the idea is to secure our society, then we not only have to have the justice, we not only have to see Albert Bourla perp walked, and we're going to see that happen. We not only have to see Fauci perp walked, and we're going to see that happen too, and probably a lot of others. But we also have to have the unity to then rebuild the society on the other side of that without throwing hammers at each other. And I think that's what President Trump is attempting to play to at this day, at this moment, especially when the country is still whipped up about the events of September.
Yeah. Okay. I also wonder, like in Portland, Oregon, everything that's going on in there, and as vast as this hatred is it ever going to get? Are they ever going to change? I mean, those it's pretty bad.
I think they will. I have to say, my faith in humanity is reinforced by my faith in Almighty God, and I don't think that we would get all of the way. And this is just my own personal opinion for the folks out there. This isn't, based on research or anything, but I don't think that we could come this far and make this much progress and see the level of unification that we've seen. And it's a great deal. I really feel confident that we're 75 to 80% of the way on all of the basic foundational principles: freedom of speech, you can't shoot people for what they think, these types of just basic common sense understandings. But I don't think we've got all of this way to lose an entire 20%. I think we can get 10 or 12 or 13 more percent. I think we can really whittle it down. And the ones that are truly problematic and psychotic out of their minds to the point that they're dangerous to society, they're going to end up in Alcatraz or places along those lines.
Thank you, SG. And also to Amy and everybody here, just remember, you can't just pull the Band-Aid off something like this or anything that we've been going through, right? Because it will create mass chaos. You got to understand how many people rely on the big pharma, right? So if you start just pulling that Band-Aid off, they're going to lose their minds in the sense of they can't get their medications or anything anymore, right? So I do believe, like SG has said, and many of us have said, that exposure, bringing them to the forefront, and it's humiliation, right? Because we all know what this guy has done, right? He's the head of Pfizer. So just remember, they're trying to keep it as minimal as possible and try to save as many lives as possible, because through chaos, as we know, unfortunate things happen. So thank you for your question, Amy, and thank you, SG, for your answer. All right, Trump Train, go ahead. Your mic is unmuted. Go ahead, Trump Train.
Hey, SG. Now that the government is shut down, even though the Senate is going back to vote Friday to open it back up, do you see this as the removal of the Congress and the Senate?
That's a heavy question. And I have to say, I don't think so. The time, and honestly, this is based on my own opinion. I'll bring up some research here in just a second, but my initial impression on my own opinion is no, because the timing doesn't feel right for that. It feels like we're getting some progress, like I was just mentioning a moment ago, on really bringing these folks that are, highly brainwashed and have been heavily brainwashed, most of them from academia. I'm noticing academia and professional associations we're really starting to get them into the fold here. And I think if we had a serious activity like that at this stage, I think that we would undermine that progress with respect to the population and our overall consciousness as a civilization, who we are, what it means to be American. These are questions that we have to ask anymore, because a lot of people don't know. They don't know what it means to love your land, to love your flag, to pledge allegiance to the United States and to the one living, the one true God. No one, a lot of people don't think about that anymore. And I think part of that consideration is factoring into some of this. Now, the government shutdown itself, to me, it looks much more like it is preparation for the installation of, activation of, or beginning the public rollout of this new financial way of life. We've seen just very recently the fact that JP Morgan is going to tokenize all of the assets underneath their account holdings. It's been only a few days ago that there was a publication made, I want to say it was from Reuters, about the new blended financial ecosystem and how there's going to be a correlative crypto, standard real world thing, however it looks, whether it's a treasury note or a coin or a weight of metal, whatever it ends up looking like, there's going to be a physical and a digital or an informational correlative there. And now that's official government published news, essentially, because they reference some government entities in that. And so I think what we've got going on right now is reprogramming, for lack of a better characterization, a slow process happening that's been happening all across the international ecosystem for a number of years now, not just months, but years, now beginning to seep its way into the Western world markets. I think that's exactly why you're seeing the rhetoric escalate with France and Paris and this idea of being actively prepared for a conflict with Russia, a publication that was made just today. It was just yesterday that French special forces hopped on a Russian oil tanker. There's more to that story that Anons out there will appreciate. I just don't have enough time to get into it today because it's like a half of a file in and of its own right. But for the surface population out there, that clearly characterizes, when I say surface, I mean consciousness, normies out there, that clearly is an indication, a move towards World War III and provocation with Russia. So all of these things, and we've got the stuff with Poland and all of these other things, and that was Ukraine using Russian-made drones. It's been proven out now. So as we look at what's happening, it's sort of like a tete-a-tete. It's like a back and forth, a call and response. One side does something, the other side responds. One side does something, and the other side responds. Or then the other side attempts to prevent the other side from doing something, and then you have this volley that ends up going on. And I think we're seeing that not only in things like the investigations of Charlie Kirk, the volley between the narratives that we've witnessed out there and who's fighting for whose attention and what's really going on here, but we're seeing that in the governmental space. We're seeing that in the public narrative space about other issues like healthcare. We had a question a moment ago about Pfizer. I've seen several questions about vaccines itself and the recent announcement with Tylenol and the correlative to autism and things of that nature. So all of these are banters that are going back and forth almost in a binary way. And while all of the noise is going on, now we have this government shutdown. And so none of anyone's paychecks, financial systems are working correctly right now. And everyone's distracted with Epstein and Israel and Mossad and Qatar and Gaza and the Russia conflict. And is France going to go to war with Russia? And is Poland really going to fire on Ukrainian, Russian drones over its airspace and things of this types of nature? While everyone is looking in all of these places, we have this quiet shutdown now happening in front of the eyes of the world. And I think there's a lot more to it from a financial component. And who knows what October is going to hold. October is traditionally a hot month for financial markets worldwide. It's widely viewed as the reset month or the beginning of the fiscal year for a lot of the Western world markets. The international markets all have an agreed upon April 1 new fiscal year beginning point, but a lot of Western markets operate on the October 1 as well as that April 1. So it's really very fascinating. I'm intrigued to see where it goes. I think it's too early to make definitive conclusions about these assertions that I'm making, and they are just educated hypotheses. I'm not reporting this as news, for example, but it would not surprise me if we start to see some wonkiness in all of our financial intersections in the United States of America through the month of October, right after this shutdown is resolved, if it gets resolved in the next 30 days.
Thank you, SG. Did that answer your question, Trump Train?
Yes, Jenny, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here. All right, Miss Sherry, your mic is unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, Jenny. Hi, SG.
Hello.
My question is, we recently saw Trump switch to that Ukraine was going to win the war against Russia. And my question is, because we know of the Burisma, the trafficking, the biotech labs, all of these things, was that said because maybe it's been taken care of there?
Well, that is a fantastic question. And I have to say, there's a lot that comes out of President Trump's pivot on the Ukrainian issue. And again, this is another issue that I think a lot of MAGA out there is left scratching their heads with, going, why in the world is this guy saying that? That's not what we voted for at all. But what we did vote for was an end to things like organized, government-sponsored and sanctioned industrial scale child trafficking. We did vote for an end to biological terrorism, which is a serious concern that goes on in these black markets, as well as, through government aspects and channels. And it's not just the state channels. Oftentimes it's the paramilitary or the rogue state or rogue actor channels that offer the largest and deepest threats. And so with what's been going on in Ukraine, the biological laboratories, in my opinion, have been mostly dealt with by Moscow. And I think we see that through the fact that there's not been coordinated large-scale cruise missile strikes all across Ukraine, really since the beginning of the war. We've seen it 2 or 3 times now. One of those times was more of a show of force than anything else with the new ballistic missile technology that Russia had. And so I think in some regards, we can chalk that up to, at least with the Pentagon's activities, a great deal of that. When I say Pentagon, I mean off-book, unsanctioned activities a great deal of that has probably been dealt with by this point. Now, the rest of it, I would venture a guess, is focused on cleanup of the infrastructure that allowed for the development of biological terroristic agents, because you need biomaterial, you need bioorganic samples in order to develop pathogens, especially if you're going to try and target those pathogens. But I think the infrastructure and the scale of what has been going on in the underground of eastern Ukraine, and really all of the way up into the Baltic states along the Baltic Sea coast, certainly in far western areas of Russia up through the Kursk region, and even over into parts of what is now modern day Poland. The scale of the underground operations is magnanimous and enormous. This is the same area of Europe that the Hitlerian government of the 1940s was able to utilize as, essentially a massive entrenchment and surface and underground operational fortification arrangement. And a lot of it was built upon old catacombs and refined in the 1940s by slave labor at the direction of the Nazi German government. So, and the Bolshevik government. So as we look at what's happening now, when President Trump says, "Oh yeah, well, Ukraine can win the war," I'm sure that if we pay them enough, if we give them enough money and send them a few weapons, then they can get even their land back, and maybe some of Russia's, I think was what his statement was. I remember thinking to myself, that is too outlandish and too outrageous of a statement to be sincere. That has to be a pandering to the mainstream media outlets out there, because he knows that this is going to go aflame in the Western press. He knows that the Russians will obviously see this as an invitation to escalate the conflict. And he also knows that the largest underground cave system and underground military base system in Southeast Europe lies beneath the city of Odessa. And Odessa is on the Ukrainian south coast, currently in Ukrainian-held territory. So for the Russians to get in there and do any type of cleanup operation to that massive catacomb system and other catacomb systems, potentially up in the Baltic state areas, depending on what happens with this NATO incitation of a false flag, warfare event with Russia, I think in order to achieve that in a way that makes sense, the Russians have to expand their military operation, and it has to be a publicly visible expansion. So President Trump, in my opinion, in the same way that he sort of invited President Xi and President Putin to try to crash the US dollar in December of 2024 with some outrageous post that he put out on Truth Social about what he was going to do if any country tried to crash the dollar, I think the exact same strategy is playing out here, with the obvious invitation and indication that it's going to move forward to expanded Russian military activity. And I want to bring up Odessa specifically again. I think they're going to be one of the next future targets. I said this about 18 months ago, but I think I was way too far ahead of the curve with relation to how these campaigns have to flesh themselves out and progressively move forward in a safe way. But Dmitry Medvedev, former president of Russia, and the current leader, if I'm not mistaken, or chairman of the Russian Parliamentarian Security Council, made a post on X, and I want to say it was a 2023 post, but it may have been a 2024 post, which was him holding a large Kalashnikov. It was an AI generated picture of himself holding a large Kalashnikov, and the English translation of the picture said, "Odessa, hold on, we are coming." So I'm looking at this right now, and it seems ripe for the opportunity with respect to the U.S. government being neutered. We can't move payment around inside certain areas of the government and the Pentagon to include the military, which would make a great deal of sense if you're trying to sort of create a false start situation for saboteurs or deep state actors that still exist within the ranks on our side. Russia has a history of military campaigns in October that are very successful on behalf of Moscow, going all of the way back to Tsar Alexander. So I think that this could be a really, really interesting next 30 days. And I think President Trump is essentially inviting President Putin to take it to the next step.
Thank you, SG. Thank you, Sherry. All right. Let's see. Kathy Jackson, I have unmuted your mic again. Do you have a question for SG? Go ahead. Go ahead, Kathy. Your mic is unmuted.
No, I hit that accidentally. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. All right. JP, your mic is unmuted. Do you have a question for SG? Go ahead.
Yes, I do. Do you believe in the currency exchange revaluation? And if so, when?
Direct and to the point. I like that, JP. So I do believe in a revaluation. I've said for a while that I think it's going to be a more cascading thing rather than pop, everyone's Forex has suddenly changed overnight. But we've got clear indications from Iraq all through 2024 and all through 2025 showing that they are undertaking a number of different things internally with respect to their own economics. And one of those things is reassessing the valuation of their own resources. And so this is significant in the sense that, if a country is going to readmit itself to trade circles around the world, they're obviously going to have to be working with current data. They can't submit 3-year-old, 5-year-old, or in Iraq's case, over 25-year-old data to world trade bodies and expect those bodies to have any confidence that that's actually what the true valuation is going to reflect in the present day. So an entire inventory, if you've ever been a manager, taking a full inventory of everything that they have and assessing its value internally with respect to their own opinion and also externally with respect to competition in the worldwide space, I think that takes some serious time. Now, I saw a publication from the War Department, not the Defense Department anymore, the War Department, the other day that they were essentially drawing out a significant contingency of the leftover advisors that they had in Iraq that have been working with the Iraqi government on increasing economic activity. So the War Department, through this press release, admitted that the United States military has been assisting Iraq to get back on their feet economically, at least in the sense of advice and counsel and guidance in how to do that. They're officially scrolling that mission down and reducing it. I can't remember if the press release said they're going to completely close it out, but I remember the words very, very reduced. And the hope is that the Iraqi government can now essentially stand on its own 2 feet. And they named a couple of operative bodies inside Iraq that are helping, to manage that process along. So why am I giving all of this context to the question? It was a short and brief question, but it's a long and long-winded answer. Just get to the point, right? The point is you cannot undertake any of what I just described and not revalue the dinar. It's just not possible because we don't have current valuation data to go off of. Even if we wanted to not revalue the dinar, we don't even know what we wouldn't revalue it to. So we have to have a valuation, and the valuation is going to be much greater than the exchange rate has been since 2003, because the exchange rate since 2003 has been representative of essentially a vassal rump state of the Federal Reserve and the U.S. military, Washington, D.C. based deep state government on the ground there in Iraq, and they didn't even have access to their own stuff. No Iraqi professionals, experts, academics, appointed representatives, no one was allowed to the actual valuation, or excuse me, to the actual, resource valuation metrics and tables. No one had a seat at that table the entire time that the military operation and post-military government in Baghdad was in operation in Iraq from 2003, really up until the first Trump presidency. And so this entire process, which has been several years in the making, obviously, continues forward, but it's now continuing forward in a really obvious way. Things are materially beginning to make sense now. And the progression of events, I think, leads me to believe, with the U.S. military officially drawing down some of its operations, the Iraqi central bank discussing like 2 or 3 times this year that they're going to have national forums of experts to, essentially talk about how they're going to trade resources internally and externally, and what the best ideas and channels and arrangements for that really are, how they're going to keep their money away from terrorist rogue actors that are still operating in the Middle East. And they're doing that in conjunction with a lot of other Middle Eastern states, something like 12 or 14 of them. All of this tells me that the time frame must be getting close, because we're taking serious steps now to secure this new pathway. In other words, the pathway has already been built, in my opinion. At this point, it just looks like we're securing it and preparing to roll it out to the world. I couldn't begin to say when. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw it anytime in the next 3 to 6 months. And I don't think it's possible that you can do that without seeing a serious change in valuation that must be reflected mathematically in foreign exchange markets. You can't have that valuation and siphon it all off in this new crypto digital blended physical ecosystem that we have. That won't be possible anymore. And so I think, and I would say that this logic would also apply to other countries that are undergoing similar processes. I've seen the Zim, I've seen the Dong, I've seen all sorts of different things. I don't know anything about currencies from the stance of trading currencies, but I understand how basic valuation economics works. And I think as we look at this landscape, it can't be long now for Iraq, and others would probably be shortly behind.
Thank you, SG. Great answer. All right, Norma Reynolds, your mic is unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, you were just answering my question, except you gave me a hiccup when you said 3 to 6 months. But then you're also saying soon taking place. So do you mean that the revaluations could be taking place even in the month of October when you were talking about the financial activity that usually takes place in October?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, Miss Reynolds. I don't think that anything is off the table now with this government shutdown. We have this
Okay.
interruption of the U.S. civil government to respond to things, not from an emergency services standpoint, but for more of a bureaucratic and administrative services, right? We paused the paperwork, essentially, and the financial systems are also paused as a result of that, a great deal of them, everything except the super essential ones and the ones that are, of course, codified into law. So I think, yes, October could be, from a speculation standpoint, could
Right.
be a time frame where this could begin to roll out publicly. I could see it, taking until November or December even. I truly don't know. I can say that when we begin to see it, Forex markets worldwide, foreign exchange markets will respond very, very rapidly, and that's going to cause an avalanche. And so I'm looking at this as sort of like a match tip in many regards. Once we, bring, and it doesn't just have to be Iraq, it could be any of these other decimated third world currencies that, were essentially rump states of the military apparatus in the West. Any
Right.
of them coming back online, they're going to cause a cascade event that I just can't see taking very long, because markets have to be able to trade with one another. Ethiopia and Zimbabwe and the Congo all have to be able to send their stuff at the same time that Iraq and, Syria and Turkey and all of the different European countries, they're doing business together. All of this has to work together seamlessly. So the cascade event, the cascade sequence would have to be relatively short-lived, in my opinion, or you'd just derail the entirety of world markets.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. You're making me feel a lot better. I know nobody knows exactly when, but I just want to make sure, with your opinion, that with all the volatility of everything and all the big push of all the noise and news and accomplishments and everything that's going on, that we could still hold out hope for this taking place before long. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Norma. Thank you, SG. All right, Paul R., I've unmuted your mic again. Do you have a question for SG? Go ahead, Paul R. Okay. Going once, going twice. Cassandra, I'm going to unmute your mic. Go ahead and ask SG your question. Go ahead, Cassandra. Go ahead, Cassandra. Your mic is unmuted. Hello. Okay. All right. Here, I have one for you. I know, SG, you've got what, maybe about 5 more minutes?
I've got about 8 minutes.
8 minutes? Oh, that's even better. Okay, let's see. I've got one here from Cupid. It says, can you please give any insight into Australia? I think maybe what they're talking about, maybe about what's going on over there.
Sadly, I cannot, because I've not had my research focus on Australia anytime in the last 3 to 4 weeks, and so the information that I would give you would probably be outdated with as fast as our stuff is developing these days. And I don't want to come from a place of not understanding the basic frameworks of the politics at play over the last 30 days.
Thank you, SG. I appreciate your transparency and honesty. Okay, so since we don't really have any hands or questions, which is surprisingly on the board, can we talk a little bit about Bibi's visit here? Because we know there wasn't a color guard, right? And I just think this whole visit with Bibi just kind of shows more to us, we the people, who really is in control. You know, you have a lot of those naysayers out there saying, oh, Trump is just Bibi's puppet and all this kind of BS. So can you give us your take on that, SG?
I mean, so I want to preface my take by saying that we are in an irregular warfare, unconventional conflict. There are cascading layers of true events and disinformation events and misinformation events. Misinformation is just, mistaken information, sincerely mistaken information. All of this tying into this broader landscape of what's actually happening out there in the world. So I want to preface that by saying that, because I genuinely understand and I get it, that people look at President Trump and the administration and they say, oh, they're just controlled by Bibi. They're just letting him do whatever. He gets away with what he wants. He's got all this influence in politics. It's always about AIPAC. Now there's a good chance that his government was involved in the death of an American on American soil. I get it. At the same time, what we saw in the Oval Office was daddy forcing the unruly teenager to apologize to the neighbor for damaging the neighbor's yard. And you mentioned humiliation a minute ago. Humiliation is actually part of, in my opinion, some of the political landscape that's playing out in a more or less seen way, but perhaps not in an initially noticed way. But it's important. The wavelength feeling, the emotional imprint on a person of being humiliated is horrible. Public shaming out there was at one point in time so significant in its effect, Jenny, that it was utilized as a form of punishment, as a form of being you were shamed in front of the community, because that was considered to offer a greater likelihood of you not doing this again than throwing you in the clink. And so humiliating Bibi Netanyahu like that in the Oval Office, an office that Bibi Netanyahu has been accustomed to basically owning himself from afar over the last 20 years, that cannot be overstated in any significant way, in my opinion. That was clearly a ritual. Now, with respect to what we've seen from the state of Israel, and we talk about consciousness warfare again, and I'm going to come back to this concept of unity. How do you unify a population that does not have a binary fracture, but has hundreds of fractures? And moreover, how do you get some of those large fractures along ideological and faith lines to start talking to one another? Well, you have to break the mold. And you have to break the mold in all of the ways that are meaningful to each group individually and specifically first, because they will not drop that pride and ego long enough to have a meaningful discussion across the aisle until they think that they might be wrong. And so what we've got going on right now is the shattering of this evangelical consciousness in the United States of America, not from a Christian point of view, but from a fealty to a particular nation state in the 20th century and beyond point of view. When we talk about the biblical Israel, we're not talking about Tel Aviv. We're talking about the offspring of Jacob. We're talking about a people. We're talking about a bloodline lineage that had a faith tied to what we would call Almighty God, or the one true God. We're not talking about Benjamin Netanyahu, who is Polish, by the way, for the folks out there. He's not a Semitic in the true DNA genealogical sense. The man scientifically, biologically, he's Polish. He does not come from the area of the world that he currently controls. And so looking, and I know I'm waxing a long time on this answer, Jenny, but it's sort of a big, elephant. We have to chomp it many different bites at a time. It takes me a while. But circling back to this concept of, who's in charge of who here, he's allowing the state of Israel, and in my opinion, I think there's some arm twisting going on, forcing the state of Israel to shatter the conceptions around the world that the state of Israel has spent the last half century cultivating. He's forcing them to unravel their own tree. And at the same time that that's happening, you're seeing public humiliation on a level that these people have never known before in the eyes of the world on live television. The unfortunate truth here is that it's not just that simple, though. You've also got rogue elements, and Q told us this, that are out there in the world hiding behind governments, but they're not in governments, but they've got serious firepower and serious entrenchment, and they offer serious risk and serious threat analysis and threat response potential to this path moving forward, and they have to be removed. They have to be destroyed, because they will not come to the table. They were already given the chance, and they've actively chosen to resist and fight. And a lot of the Shin Bet community, and a lot of the Mossad intelligence community, and a lot of the IDF, believe it or not, falls into that camp. No differently than a lot of NATO military commanders fall into that camp, and a lot of CIA personnel fall into that camp. We're talking about the same overall monstrosity. And so those factions are embedded in civilian populations, to include Gaza. They are embedded in places like Tehran or the central city area of Doha. They are embedded in Central Africa, where all of these coups have now broken out. And you've seen a lot of different border skirmishes with African nations as a result of that. The reason why is because now their bedroom is under threat from the new government that just took over. They are embedded in South America. There's a lot of them in Venezuela. And that's one of the reasons you're seeing the escalation with Venezuela right now in the present day and time. It has nothing to do with Chavez and Maduro and all of this. And the mainstream media and even a lot of the alternative media would have you thinking that. But it's not about that. It's about the intelligentsia. It's about the entrenchment of a deep state black market criminal syndicate with worldwide functional junction nodes. It's about taking apart a shadow economy, a shadow infrastructure worldwide, a scaffolding that they built for their criminal activity, a seamless machine. And we're having to disassemble it both politically, mentally, and kinetically. And that's one of the reasons that you've seen some of the horrors and atrocities that you have, because unfortunately, some of this stuff has been going on so long in areas that are so exposed, there is no way to stop the collateral.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you, SG, and you never have to apologize. I love your answers. They're very detailed, and I'm sure the audience loves them as well. Okay, Cassandra, are you here? I've unmuted your mic again. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks so much. So thank you, and thank you for answering the RV question and with intelligence, not tomorrow. We have been programmed, SG, to link the RV to the med beds. And, you know, with Trump coming out and kind of creating this teaser, I'm a practical mystic, but I'm really challenged that this thing, they're just going to throw a bunch of people in, we're all going to regrow our teeth and limbs and, you know, go hide in Bermuda for about 3 months. Can you give any clarity of your belief then, therefore, with the RV? I mean, for myself, I'm taking out all my teeth in the end of October and doing a full restoration. And all of us have these different decisions that we've been told for 3 years, and many of us have waited. And so can you give any feedback to the RV, the link with the med beds, the practicality of the med beds, and timing with that in coherence with what we're seeing right now? Because there is a safety measurement. If hell and high water is going to break out, how are they going to do this safely and creatively? Because I see people getting enraged if they see a bunch of people getting healthy and they don't have access. And then they have to wait for some queue medbed card. So just kind of curious what your thoughts are. Thanks, and thanks, Jenny.
What a fantastic and measured question to close the call with off today. I think that this, and I genuinely mean that. I think that this comes back to that phrase that Q says time and time and time again, logical thinking. And a lot of us forget that logic is not just what we think is the most likely sequence of events, right? We have our own logic, and then there is self-critical or self-introspective logic, which sort of is a refining process, right? You sort of have to almost start with the concept that maybe I'm a little bit, maybe my logic is wrong with this. So what really holds water if I come at it at a different angle? And that's a mental process that is not cultivated naturally anymore, although I think that it could be if we focused on it a little bit in the early childhood years. But the logical thinking for me with the medbed situation is, and has always been, that it has to make sense technologically with the societal readiness, for lack of a better characterization. In other words, you're not going to stick a flying car on the freeways tomorrow because we're not quite there yet. We're in the concept phase. We're in the design phase nationally. We're having the talk. We're having the discussion. We've got people throwing a little bit of dollars and some research at it. We've got people that are, working on various technologies or trying to understand technologies to focus on that. The same is true of anything that's next generation or quantum or scalar or, whatever sort of new age bio wellness terminology you want to apply to it. That entire body of understanding, while ancient knowledge that is in many ways resurfacing, it still requires understanding. We still have to build out academic understanding of it and practical understanding of it. We have to then take that understanding of what the technology is or can be, and we have to marry that with the possibilities at societal scale. Do we have the capability for mass rollout? Yes, I would say we do. We live in a pretty self-connected, or a pretty continuously connected information age. I think that we are moving commerce through the United States now faster and more quickly, down the freeways and through the airspace than we ever have before. But your point about practicality a moment ago, is it practical to do that all in one fell swoop? I don't think that it is. And I don't think any technological innovation that has permanently changed the trajectory of society was ever rolled out overnight. It's always been in a week, month, year sort of process as society gradually, latched on to the idea that this is a real thing. This is just as real as apple pie, right? It goes from a concept phase to a real world phase. And so I think with President Trump's teaser, I think what he's showing us is that this is something that can be true. This is not just a crazy conspiracy lunatic idea, but it does take a change in understanding, and the change in understanding takes some time. And so I've been telling people for a couple of years, and I would say the same to you, I wouldn't put anything off with expectation that we're going to have something amazing rolled out after the 10 days of darkness and all of these things, because those civil society innovations have to reflect society itself. They can't be forced upon us by some sort of maneuver or some sort of law enforcement initiative or some sort of societal shutdown. It has to be organic. It has to gestate, because we want that anyway, right? It has to be fun to discover the capabilities. It has to be fun to roll the new technology out. It has to make sense for the practitioners to bring it to the patients, who will bring it to their families, who will then bring it to their workers and their colleagues and all of these different people, right? And it networks itself out through the landscape and through the population, and suddenly it's as real as the automobile driving down the road. But it takes a natural process, and those natural processes, I think, take more time for us in our very human form. We like to try to rush things sometimes, and I think God has this broader view, and he says, now just slow down, because you're going to lose the essence of it. You're going to lose the flavor of it. And so that, I think, is what we've got to look forward to. But as far as time frames and things of that nature, I would say that it has to be organic. We've got this fair going on in Iowa. We've got these different regulations that are supposed to be removed with respect to health. RFK has announced, some significant quote unquote health innovations that they're going to discuss at the end of this year. Next year is the 250th anniversary for the United States of America as a nation after the Declaration. I think that's going to be a significant year for societal progress. But again, it has to make sense at the community level, and some communities will come along more rapidly than others.
Thank you, SG. Yeah, what a great way to end this. Thank you for your question, Cassandra. And everybody here, SG had an hour of his time today, and we are there, everybody. And SG comes and graces us with his presence once a month. So SG, we'll see you in a month.
Sounds excellent. Thank you for having me, Jenny. God bless everyone. Have a great
All
evening.
right. Good to have you back, sweetie, and we'll see you in a month, and God bless you. And everybody here, have a great night, and come back tomorrow. We will have Carrie Kasem, Casey Kasem's daughter, and then I believe Friday we're going to have Rick Anson from Brain IQ Health. So with that, everybody have a great night. Thank you, SG. We'll talk to you soon. God bless everybody.